Good morning, Dr. Peter.
Good morning.
Hi, I'll be giving a quick introduction in Arabic and English, and then I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نرحب بكم حضورنا الكريم في محاضرة اليوم تحت عنوان الذكاء الاجتماعي خلال الأزمات، ونستضيف من خلالها الخبير الدولي دكتور بيتر هاثيرلي-Greene. معكم محدثتكم فاطمة السيد الهاشمي، مدير مشاريع برنامج دبي للتميز الحكومي. أعزائي الحضور، ها قد وصلنا لمنتصف شهر رمضان المبارك. نسأل الله العلي القدير أن يتقبل منا ومنكم صالح الأعمال ويعيننا على صيام وقيام ما تبقى من هذا الشهر الفضيل. كما تعلمون، ما زلنا نعيش في هذه الظروف الاستثنائية، ولكننا جميعاً على يقين أن القادم أفضل، وأن المولى عز وجل سيرفع عنا هذا الوباء والبلاء في القريب العاجل بإذن الله. وفي هذا الصدد، نحن من خلال برنامج دبي للتميز الحكومي نوصيكم بضرورة الالتزام بالتباعد الاجتماعي، والالتزام بكافة الإجراءات الاحترازية والتدابير الوقائية، والالتزام بكافة التعليمات الصادرة عن حكومة دولة الإمارات لمواجهة هذا الفيروس. ونود أن ننوه بأن برنامج دبي للتميز الحكومي ينظم هذه اللقاءات المعرفية عن بعد بشكل أسبوعي خلال شهر رمضان المبارك ضمن فعاليات مركز المعرفة والابتكار، وسوف يركز من خلال هذه المحاضرات على إدارة الأزمات، ويستضيف من خلالها متحدثين وخبراء عالميين. كما يشجعكم البرنامج بالاستغلال الأمثل لهذه الأوقات، خاصة في فترة العمل عن بعد، لتطوير مهاراتكم ومعارفكم والاستفادة من الدورات التدريبية التي يتم عبر منصة التدريب الذكي في نشر ثقافة التميز والابتكار، والتي تحتوي على 42 حقيبة تدريبية موزعة على 11 برنامج تدريبي، ويحصل المتدرب في النهاية على شهادة اجتياز. لمزيد من المعلومات يمكنكم زيارة الموقع الإلكتروني dgep.gov.ae، والجدير بالذكر أن منصة التدريب الذكي مخصصة بشكل حصري لموظفي حكومة دبي. نتمنى لكم الاستفادة من محاضرة اليوم، علما أن مدتها ساعة وستكون باللغة الإنجليزية. أستأذنكم الآن للتحدث باللغة الإنجليزية. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning everyone. I hope all of you and your families are staying safe and healthy. We are delighted to have you all here in today's webinar. Dubai Government Excellence Program through Knowledge and Innovation Hub is pleased to announce weekly webinars during Ramadan and exclusively on crisis management field. Before starting the session, I would like to give you some instructions on how to use the webinar tool. Everyone will be muted. On your right side, there is a toolbar where you can raise your questions during the presentation, preferably in English, in the questions box. DGEP team will pick questions to be answered by the speaker at the end of the presentation. The duration of this session is only 1 hour. At the end of the webinar session, you will receive an email that includes survey, a link to your attendance certificate. Please make sure to download it. Also, you will find a link to a recorded session. Presentation materials and handouts are available on the webinar. Today's session is about emotional intelligence and crisis times. And with great pleasure, we would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Peter Hatherley-Greene. Dr. Peter has worked as an educator, coach, trainer, and facilitator in the UAE for almost 25 years in a variety of educational settings. His passion and expertise in Emiratization support, emotional intelligence, soft skills training, education and learning, and coaching has given him many opportunities to work with some of the largest organizations in the region, including HSBC, KPMG, Omantel, Zurich International, PNG in India, UAE, Egypt, Al-Maraik in KSA in Oman, American University of Sharjah, ADNOC, King Abdullah Economic City in Jeddah, Abu Dhabi Police, and many, many others. Ladies and gentlemen, while we cannot control the pandemic and other potential crises, we can control who we are and what we want to stand for. Emotional intelligence is simply being aware of our emotions, listening to what they are telling us to focus on, telling us what is important, and telling us how to act. Let's learn more about this by welcoming Dr. Peter. Good morning again, Doctor.
Good morning, Fatima, and good morning, everybody out there. And thank you for your kind introduction.
Thank you. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Fatima. Normally, if I'm addressing a face-to-face group of people, I would be able to look at your faces and see the state of your emotions just by simply viewing the audience. But today I can't do that. So I'm going to start this morning off with a poll. And I'm going to ask you a very simple question, which is this. So on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being you feel worried and anxious, and 5 being feeling happy and optimistic, how would you rate yourself right now? Okay, I'll give you about 30 seconds to input your response. Okay, thank you, Fatma, for putting the results up. So we've got quite a clear winner around 3 out of 5, and really nicely to see just below that is 4 out of 5. So most of you are feeling moderately okay about the things right now, and some of you are feeling actually quite okay. Only a few are at 1. And I'm glad to hear that. And I'm pleased to see that 15% of you are feeling very happy and optimistic about the future. These reactions, first of all, thank you very much for those results. These reactions are very natural. Human beings are hardwired to detect uncertainty. It's one of the things that our brains do. So it's very natural that when we begin to feel uncertainty, we begin to also feel anxious. And this anxiety doesn't help us very much. Sometimes it makes us shut down. So I imagine a lot of you are going through a roller coaster of up and down feelings right now, and that's absolutely natural. So the purpose of this presentation today, there's 3 things that I'd like to cover. One is, I want to help you to try and respond appropriately to this feeling of uncertainty. I also want you to try to find the strength and wisdom that lies in all of us. There's a lot of resources that probably lay untapped that we can use right now. And lastly, I'm going to show you some new skills in emotional intelligence that you can apply in this time. We'll come back at the end of the session and use the same survey to see if there's been any shift in your thinking. Now, I know some of you are looking at this glass right now and thinking, oh yes, this is the same old, the glass half empty, the glass half full question. But what I'm going to ask you is this, and if you've got a glass handy or a cup of tea or coffee in your hand, I'd like you to follow my instructions. So first of all, hold the glass out, pick the glass up, hold the glass out parallel to the floor, and listen to my question. So how heavy do you think this glass of water is that I'm holding? So for some of you who've got a full cup of tea or a full glass of water, it's probably reasonably heavy. But really, the absolute weight of this glass doesn't matter actually. It all depends on how long you're holding it. I think if you hold it, for about 30 seconds, it's probably okay. I think if you went to probably 5 seconds, you begin to feel it a little bit in your arm. More than an hour, definitely, I don't think you could hold even an empty glass of for an hour. If you held it all day, your arm would cramp up. So the important thing is this: the weight of the glass doesn't change, but the longer you hold it, the heavier it feels. So what am I talking about here? So I'm talking about the current stresses and worries in your life now are very much like this glass of water. Just think about them for a time and nothing happens. Think about them for a little more time and you begin to ache a little bit. If you think about them all night long, then you wake up in the morning feeling numb and paralyzed. You'll begin to feel I'm incapable of anything. So the important thing the lesson I want you to take away from this is this. It's important to acknowledge your stresses and worries and share those feelings with someone you trust. If you feel the weight of yesterday's emotions, it's a strong sign it's time to accept and then act upon those feelings. That's what feelings are for. They're designed to highlight what's important, where we need to focus and direct our energy. You can put your glasses down now if you're still holding them. So I have a picture here of the Dubai Creek taken in the 1930s. And I want to just take a little bit of a moment to actually directly address anyone who in the audience who is one of the indigenous people of this region, the Emirati Arabs. Because I'm going to remind you, if you're a student of history, you've actually been here before. For example, you and your ancestors have lived in this region for around 8,000 years. You've lived in one of the most inhospitable environments on the planet. While almost all human beings have an instinct for survival, you have turned it into an art form. For example, relying on your intelligence and wits, you created the phallage system by tunneling into hills to locate a water table that wasn't visible, and then you direct that through an ingenious system of channels to create areas of agricultural date palms and orchards. Up in the mountains, you terraced dry areas of land to create small areas of agricultural land to grow crops. You've created a strong system of governance where protection of the few meant safety for all. You looked outwards to other countries to establish trade routes and import items not found locally. So you not only survived, but you thrived, though there were sometimes very good and very difficult years. Some of these difficult years began in the 1930s when the region's pearling trade was badly impacted as Japanese cultured pearls appeared. Every summer there used to be 20,000 pearling boats out there in the Arabian Sea hunting for the precious lulu. But in this photograph taken in 1929, there were only 60 of Dubai's pearling boats left after reaching a maximum of 335 boats in 1907. And of course, during both world wars last century, you suffered as Great Britain's gaze turned elsewhere towards the killing fields of Western Europe, leaving the local population unprotected and undernourished as food imports ground to a halt. So, life definitely became a lot easier after the discovery of oil in the 1950s. And yet, once again, it was plunged into a time of great uncertainty when Great Britain announced in 1968 that she was formally withdrawing from the Gulf in 3 years. Sheikh Rashid and Sheikh Zayed, that you can see here, peace be upon them, understood the danger they were in and quickly met at Al-Thami to agree to work together to form a federation of all the Emirates, including hopefully Bahrain and Qatar. Sheikh Zayed remarked that those 3 years were some of the most difficult of his life. This particular photograph was taken in 1971 as the final negotiations concluded that eventually led to the creation of the UAE. So several years after the creation of the UAE, Sheikh Zayed looked back over that period of time, and this quote is probably reasonably widely quoted about him. This is what he had to say, looking back now on a country that he had with the other 6 emirs created out of literally the sands. He said this: "Thanks to our ancestors who challenged the adversities of time and the misfortunes of life. Because of their fortitude, our generation is living in prosperity and grace." He knew how difficult life was back before oil was discovered. And now when my wife and I go to the Dubai Marina at night and we look across the waterways and look at the lights and the beautiful buildings and the boats, it's really hard to imagine a life where food and water were never a given, and that electricity was absent and therefore could not be used to power air conditioning units to relieve the stifling heat of summer. So I just want to put this out there. So let's just say we know that as a people, as a community, and as a nation, you've been here before, staring adversity in the face, knowing what to do next. I'm a social scientist, and one of the models that I use is this model by Geert Hofstadter, who is a Dutch researcher. Geert has studied cultural dimensions and societies around the world since the 1970s. And when he finished his research, he discovered 7 cultural dimensions. And I'm going to share 3 of them with you today, which are probably quite pertinent to our study today. So the first one is individualism. And you can see there across each of the graphs, I have India, New Zealand, which is where I'm from, the UAE in green, and the United Kingdom in orange. The maximum number of all of those vertical bar graphs is 120. So midway point is 60. So what can we learn about a country's cultural bias towards certain beliefs in determining this response to the current crisis? Let's have a look at the first one, which is individualism. So this is the degree of interdependence a society maintains amongst its members. It's whether the group is more important than the individual. And I think you can see here quite plainly that the UAE has a low number for individualism. So you have a high preference for belonging to a larger social framework where individuals are expected to act according to the greater good. So I would think this cultural dimension is something that can be tapped into to make sure that, for example, when the government implemented the social distancing rules, where we had to get permits to leave the house, we were encouraged to wash our hands, there would be general compliance there because you would know that through individual actions, the greater good would be achieved. So let's have a look at the second one, which is masculinity. So masculinity is basically how a society operates in terms of conflict and in terms of ambition. Masculine societies tend to try to be the best. They're competitive. They have a win-lose mindset. Whereas feminine societies tend to like what they do, and they tend to be more collaborative, and they tend to seek win-win mindsets. So here, the score of 50 is just below halfway. So I would say this would be, there's not really a strong preference here, unlike the individualism preference. So we go to the last one, which is uncertainty avoidance. We know that in some societies, many deal with the fact that the future can never be known. So should we try to control the future or just let it happen? So this ambiguity brings with it sort of an anxiety, and different cultures have learned to deal with this anxiety in different ways. For example, some societies are relaxed about the future, like India and China, whereas countries like Korea and Russia experience anxiety, as so do the UAE. And there is strong preference there for avoiding uncertainty, and this has produced accepted codes of belief and behavior and a general respect for rules. So when I look at Hofstadter's research and I'm looking at the cultural traits that currently could help the society right now, definitely a concern for the greater good, definitely compliance with rules will definitely help us move through this crisis. So this is a good news story here. This is some capacity within society itself. So I have a second poll here for you, and what I'd like you to consider here is I'm looking particularly at your response for where do you agree with these cultural dimensions? Do you think these are true? So I'm going to give you about 30-40 seconds for you to complete that now. Okay, so thank you very much. An overwhelmingly positive response to believing that those cultural dimensions are true. And certainly in my PhD research I conducted in 2011 through to 2012, they did definitely stand out also as being considered markers for how society reacts. The only caution I would say here is this is we're painting with a very broad brush here. There are individuals that might not agree with this, and some individuals don't fit into the 85%. But as a broad idea, I think these cultural dimensions are helpful. And as I say, I think particularly in your idea of collectivist society and your avoidance of uncertainty, I think are going to help you get through this time. So, Mabruk, well done. Let's move on. So, the title of this presentation begins with two letters, EQ. So EQ is a socially accepted abbreviation of the term emotional intelligence. So you sometimes see EI, which is perhaps a more accurate abbreviation, but EQ is now regarded as the most understood term. Okay. So what is this emotional intelligence and where does it originate? So in the 1980s, two research scientists named Jack Meyer and Peter Sullivan published an academic paper in an obscure journal in the States. In that paper, they tried to understand why a smart guy called Gary Hart, who was the US Democratic Party's leading nomination for the president, could act so dumb. How dumb was he? Well, during the lead up to the election, his wife a couple of years ago had developed breast cancer and she was undergoing treatment. And during that time, he cheated on his wife, which was discovered by the media, and he was exposed. As a result, he had to resign and he's basically disappeared from view. He was the front runner of the 1988 Democratic presidential nomination, and he committed a dumb act. So Mayer and Sullivan said, well, you know, what's going on? What went on for this guy? So they did some research, not only on Gary, but also other people, and they discovered that some people have the ability to allow emotion and thinking to work together. And then they went on to define what that ability was called, and they called it emotional intelligence. So, as I said, they published this paper in a really obscure journal, and no one would have ever seen the results of their research had it not been for an author called Daniel Goleman. And Daniel found their paper, and he expanded their work in his bestseller called Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. And he published that book in 1995, which incidentally was the year that I arrived in the UAE. So Goleman, Sullivan, and Meyer founded the company called 6 Seconds, which today is the world leader in EQ training and development. And you'll see their logo on this page. What you see here is the actual model that they came up with. Now, before we delve into the model, let's just expand a little bit about what emotional intelligence is. As a practitioner of emotional intelligence, I define EQ as being smart with feelings. In other words, when an emotion pops up in my head, I don't ignore it. They are there to protect us. You know, I don't know about you, but I was raised in a generation where boys were basically taught to ignore emotions, to stifle emotions, to not cry in public. And rather inexplicably, girls were allowed to cry, and they weren't encouraged to do what we were. So there's a whole generation of men who have spent probably at least half our lives reconnecting ourselves to our emotional selves. I'm sure a lot of you out there will join with me in recognizing that. So let's explore this model a little more. So you'll see it's divided up into 3 sectors. We've got a blue sector, which is called Know Yourself. And it's in blue because we're using the metaphor of water, which of course, in which you can see reflections on a still day. We all have emotions, okay, and they drive our behavior. So increasing our awareness of our emotions can help us with our thoughts and with our actions. So moving on to the red part, choose yourself. This is red because it's about taking charge of our emotions and pausing and stopping before we actually act. We have a choice about how we show up in every situation during the day. So making a choice about how you want to show up in the world is a choice. We are not a victim of our emotions like many of us feel. And last of all, in the green part, green standing for go or growth, this is about giving yourself and decide what's really important. This is almost like the compass, our values that we have in our life. So whatever decisions we make, it impacts not only us, but our families and our friends and our colleagues. So this step is not just about us, but it's also about how we want to live our lives and connect with others in the world. Now, the first tool I'm going to show you is, and you can take this away immediately, is when you're in a situation where you're feeling strong emotions, you ask yourself 3 questions. Question number 1, what am I feeling? And so to name the feeling and then to decide how to act on it is important. So what am I feeling? And, you know, I'm just trying to think of a situation, how I can make this. So you're driving along the road. You are, you've got your children in the back, they're in their seatbelts, they're wearing their seatbelts. And someone in front of you seems to just immediately slam on their brakes, which forces you to slam on your brakes, and you have to avoid this collision. Immediately you think that the driver in front of you has wanted to kill you and your children in the back. So immediately you go at the extreme end of the emotion, which is rage. Now, if you say to yourself in that moment, I'm feeling rage right now. And if you wait just a little bit, that rage will then decrease into anger. And if you wait a little bit more, that will decrease into apprehension. So by waiting for between 6 to 10 seconds, the intensity of that emotion that you immediately felt has disappeared. And if you can wait for that 6 to 10 seconds, then you'll know how to react. And that's the second question. Which is, what are my options? What are my options? So options is simply saying, okay, so I know what I'm feeling. What is the appropriate response to this? Okay, what is the appropriate response? And it's better to have a choice of options rather than just the single pattern that we tend to go down each time. A lot of us have the same reaction when we get stressed or we get triggered. We go down the same route, which usually ends up in a cul-de-sac, in a street that has no end. And we have to turn and come back because it hasn't been helpful. So that's the second question. And the third and final question is, what do I really want? What do I want to happen as a result of this situation? And this is when you turn inward and you look at your values, your boussole, your internal compass, and you think, okay, this is what I really want. And I don't want to hurt the other person, and I want to make sure that our friendship is not damaged. In the case of the car, you don't attribute murder to that driver in front of you. You simply say, okay, this was a near accident, I got out of it, and maybe I was distracted myself, so time to move on, okay? So that's the first EQ tool that you can start applying to yourself today. What am I feeling? What options do I have? What do I really want? We sometimes put it into a mantra, which is 1, 2, 3 KCG. It's an easy one to remember. 1, 2, 3 KCG. K for know yourself, C for choose yourself, and G for give yourself. I hope you find that useful. And I definitely, in the last three months, I guess, I have found myself using this model many times. So we have here a lion tamer who is, who probably for some of you, you may already feel the stress. I don't think anyone would like to be in that person's situation right now. But what I'd like you to think about is, when we see this, we have a strong response to it. And the first part of emotional intelligence is, as I said with the KCG model, is naming the emotion. So typically when we get triggered by something or someone out there, what happens is this. We tend to respond to threat by digging into our survival response. And our survival response involves two small glands inside our brains about the size of chickpeas, and these glands are called the amygdala. Now, when our senses notice danger, the amygdala starts immediately to send out messages via hormones to our brains that shut down the thinking parts of our brain, particularly the neocortex, and it uses the hormone cortisol to do this. And then it energizes our muscles with adrenaline, just in case we need to do what? What do we need to do if we find ourselves in a state of peril or danger? What we need to do is either fight, flight or run away from the danger, or freeze. And this moment of what they call the amygdala hijack, where our thinking brain is removed and we've lost literally our mind, lasts between 6 to 10 seconds. Pretty soon afterwards, the brain retakes control, flushes out the cortisol. We still have the adrenaline in our bodies, and that sometimes when we feel at the end of the day, we feel the stress, part of the reason why we feel stress is the cortisol and the adrenaline still is sitting in our bodies and wasn't used. So in ancient times, this survival mode was very important in the survival of our species. Now today, thank heavens, we tend not to be attacked by wild animals, but I think we all know the pressures of modern life manage to provide plenty of opportunities for us to react in this way. So the second tool is this: name it and tame it. So immediately you begin to feel a strong emotion, go into your emotional vocabulary and name it in the language that you normally use, and just verbalize it. Don't just think it, but verbalize it, saying something like, I feel scared, I feel sad, I feel terrified. Immediately you do that, we know from research, particularly from the UCLA, where they used a functional magnetic resonance imaging tool, sometimes abbreviated as fMRI. They took about 30 adults and between 18 and 36, and they were given different mechanisms for processing emotional data. It turns out that by simply naming emotions reduces the emotional weight or the reaction. So what we know now is when thoughts and feelings are working together, when we are really using our emotional intelligence, we're able to self-regulate our feelings and reduce the kind of reactivity that escalates into something not helpful. So one of the things I would be advising you right now is try to expand your emotional vocabulary, because that will only lead to better understanding about yourself and about others. And so we turn to the third emotional intelligence capability. What do you see? You see looks like a woman standing on top of a hill, greeting the sunrise, or the sunset, with her arms outstretched, feeling, I would say, definitely optimistic. So optimism is about learning 3 phrases. Okay. The first phrase is, number 1, this will not last forever. Okay, this will not last forever. And we know that. We know, and particularly in other countries around the world, in my country, for example, we've had now 3-4 days where it's either been 0 or 1 confirmed new cases of COVID-19. Other cases, it's still raging through the country, but we know this has an endpoint. What makes it uncertain is where that endpoint is. So that's the first phrase. Second one, this is not changing everything in our lives. Now, I guess for those of us who have been in lockdown for a while, that's going to be hard to justify. But in our normal life, if something's happening at work or something has happened at home, it's not pervading our entire lives. It's usually just restricted to one particular area of our lives. And the third point I'd like to stress here on exercising optimism is, with a little bit of effort, you can make a difference. Okay, so framing adversity in a healthy, realistic way and taking ownership of finding solutions is exactly what we all need right now. So that's exercising optimism. Let's move on now to the final tool that I'm going to share with you. And this is understanding who we are, what we stand for. What we see here is a compass pointing north. I think in Arabic we call this a boussole. True north points to where we know where we're heading. Our true north inside of us are our values. It's what we stand for. It's who we are. And all of that determines how we show up in the world, particularly right now. And I'll show you how powerful this is. When I'm training in a face-to-face environment, I have a course called EQ for Leadership. I ask the participants on the final day, I say, okay, write down 10 values separately on small pieces of paper. I give them about 5 minutes to do that. And then I ask them to rank them in front of them on their desks. And then I say, you know, due to life's pressures that force us to take shortcuts, we don't live our values all the time. So remove 4, take away 4. Well, you start to see the hackles rise up and they begin to feel very uncomfortable about removing even just one of their 10 values that they've thought hard about. Eventually they get down to 6 values. And then I say to them, you know, we let ourselves down sometimes by not following our values. So I want you to drop another 3. This is when I get people walking out of the room. No, they don't walk out of the room, but they begin to feel real discomfort. Eventually, when they're able to do it, 3 values remain, and we call these the core values. The important thing is this: how well are we living these core values in the key domains of our lives? And the key domains of our lives, for most of us, is around family, is work, is religion. It could be around fitness or health. But it's important that we have balance through all key domains so that we live these values correctly and effectively. Last of all, I want you to look at this diagram of a couple standing on a hill holding a frame. And what on earth is this about? Well, this is about reframing. Reframing is about looking at a situation differently and gaining a new perspective to move forward. So what does this mean? Well, basically, when you look at a situation, it comprises of 3 parts. First of all, we have the story. Well, this is what we believe to be about the situation. So, you know, a few months ago, we had a belief about COVID-19. What was it about? What was going to happen? Okay. Then the assessment is basically going through those beliefs and saying, yeah, was this true? Was this really true about COVID-19? Were we going to be locked down? Did we feel like it was going to be in prison? You know, what was it going to? Were they true, or were they just stories that we made up for ourselves? And then the third part, the reframing, is when you go back over those statements and now you know what's true and you repeat those statements and not the original one. So let me give you an example of what I mean. So here's a conversation. Let's listen to this. So this person's thinking, he was just sitting there quietly doing nothing. So this was a story that someone was thinking about, quietly doing nothing, which is false, as he was breathing, listening, watching, thinking, assessment. This is the assessment. And then the reframing is, I couldn't see any reactions from him. So I put thoughts into that person's head. We have to be careful about making up stories in this current crisis. Because as far as I know, many people have reported positive feelings after the lockdowns have finished around the world. People have spoken about reconnecting with family members, learning new skills. Like, for example, I was aware of Zoom for many years before I actually had this year to actually start using it. So it hasn't all been bad. And I would invite you to definitely attempt reframing to look at your situation from a different perspective. And of course, you know, with the great opportunity that the internet provides us, reframing can be learned, and it's just a little bit of time for you to invest. So before I move on to the very last frame, I want to speak now directly to any leader of a team who's out there right now. And I know, you know, these uncertain times bring a lot of anxiety, and because of that, it often brings out the worst and best of human behaviors, not only in leaders, but also in the team. So this is my suggestion using EQ in leadership for this time. I think it's time to show non-traditional leadership traits. And some of these you may be shocked, but they will help you connect to your team. First one is empathy, showing real empathy and care for the people that work for you. Second is showing humility. Don't take credit for something the team did. Admit your weaknesses. and show vulnerability. Admit to your team that you don't have all the answers, but together you can do it. So lean into your people, empower them by giving them choices and options. And look to your own mindset, keeping it positive and people focused. This is a time for heart count, not head count. Be the leader your team needs you to be. And so I'm going to finish this presentation with this quote from a philosopher called Viktor Frankl. Viktor spent 4 years in German concentration camps during the Second World War. He survived them. And when he survived them, he spent many years thinking about, what did this experience mean? What did this experience mean? And he wrote a book, which is still published, and you can still buy it today, called In Search of Meaning. And one of the quotes from that book I'm sharing with you today, because I think it's a really important one. So I'm going to read it out, even though I know it's up on the screen, but it's important for you, I think, to listen to this quote. So he says this: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Just think about that. And if you get that, then you've learned something about emotional intelligence and choice from this presentation. So I want to invite now you to participate in the third and final poll. So can we have that up, please, Fatima or Mahir? So now, having completed the presentation, how are you feeling now on a scale of 1 to 5? Okay, wow, that's impressive. That's a big shift from the beginning of the presentation. So now 80% of you feel either 4 or 5, so much less worried, much less anxious, and feeling a lot more optimistic about you coping with this crisis. So thank you very much for responding. Thank you for your attention. Remember the 4 tools. I'll just go over them again. So the first one was, let me go back, make sure I remember it all. The first one was, just bear with me, is naming your emotions. If you name it, you can tame it. Second one was exercising optimism. And the third one was reframing. And the fourth one was use the model KCG 1, 2, 3. What am I feeling? What options do I have? What do I really want? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Peter, for the insightful presentation and for all this great dose of positiveness that we all need for. We have many questions from the audience. We will try to take some of them in this remaining 10 minutes. We will start with the first question. The question says, how emotional intelligence can help us through the coronavirus crisis. What are the things we can do to take control and manage our reactions in this difficult time?
Okay, so I think that might have been a question that was asked near the beginning of the presentation, and I hope now that I've given you 4 tools that you can immediately apply and remind yourself of the enormous capacity that you already have inside of you in terms of your collective goodwill, and also responding to the greater good, and remembering that you've been there before. You know, as a people in this land, you've suffered some tough years, and it's, you know, as recently as 2008 during the global financial crisis. You know, Dubai is still here. We're weathering the storms. So that plus the 4 tools I gave you, which is KCG 1, 2, 3, know yourself, choose yourself, exercise optimism, reframe, name and tame the emotion, and reflect on Viktor Frankl's quotation on this last slide. Okay, I hope that helps.
Sure, thank you, Doctor. We'll be moving to the next question. How can we admit our negative feeling, for example, anxiety, but at the same time not staying with the negative feeling for a long time? How can we get out of it? Okay,
that's a really good question. The first thing when you feel that negative feeling is to simply acknowledge it and verbalize it by saying, I'm feeling worried, or I'm feeling really anxious, I'm feeling like I'm frozen. Once you do that, according to the research that we have in our domain, we know that as soon as you verbalize that emotion, eventually the intensity begins to reduce. And it'll take between 6 to 10 seconds for it to do so. Once it's reduced in its intensity, then you can deal with it with your cognitive mind, because don't forget, when you're triggered, your cognitive mind is absent. When you say, you know, someone's, oh, he lost his mind, I don't know why he acted like that. They literally have lost their mind when you have the amygdala survival mode hijack. So wait for your mind to regain control and then begin to consider, what options do you have? What can I do with this? Is it helpful for me thinking these thoughts? If it's not helpful, then put it to one side. We don't have to react to all our thoughts. They are like standing over on a riverbank and watching leaves pass by. We don't have to pick up every leaf. We can let some of them float down past us. Okay, I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you, Doctor. We'll have another question. In your opinion, getting too much information through all types of media, what effects may have on person's emotional intelligence, like positive or negative?
Well, it's a mixed bag, isn't it? If you're a bit like me, I like factual news, so I tend to go onto news channels quite a lot, either television or on social media. And for me, when I'm reading facts, I feel comforted by those. They don't worry me. But I know my wife hates reading the news, and she doesn't like the news being on when, for example, when we're having dinner. So I tend not to do that when we're having dinner together. She gets triggered negatively, and I get triggered positively from this. So you've got to understand how you respond to this, to these different types of media or triggers. I think generally, I think a good thing right now would be to limit your time on social media, particularly if you know your response to anxiety and concern around COVID-19. So that would be my short response to that. Just limit your time to social media.
Sure. Okay, we'll move to the next question. Do emotions and feelings have impact on physical health? How do we minimize negative impact?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yes, they do. In fact, there's a body of science that says every cell in our body resonates with our thoughts and feelings. And I think, think about the last time you all were in a situation where you literally lost your mind, you exploded over someone, you were very angry, and then almost immediately you regretted it. And then think about how your body felt in that immediate aftermath of that explosion that you had. Body feels uncomfortable. Why? Because there's still cortisol and adrenaline flowing through our body. And if that's not used up, it tends to find its way into parts of our body that begin to harm us. So the short answer to your question, yes, feelings and our bodies are intimately related. How can we make ourselves more capable? A lot of people find going to the gym, staying well in terms of better nutrition, keeping fit, keeping connected to people. All of these are really good behaviors to fortify your emotional response in these times.
Okay, I have an interesting question here. The question is, are there any difference between males and females in emotional intelligence?
None at all, except our reaction to them. So men typically, there's a lag, because I said before, I shared with you how I was raised and how probably my generation was raised. Men were basically told, and I think a lot of particularly Arab men in the region too, basically are raised to not respond or react to emotions, and certainly not to show them, particularly the more negative ones. So definitely men, that space between the stimulus and response tends to be a long one for men. Men tend to build up and bottle up emotions until suddenly, bang, we get an explosion and people do something crazy. For females, because they're raised differently than us, and I'm not talking about just the region, but globally around the world, females for some reason have social permission to express their emotions and also to react appropriately. So yes, the emotions are the same. It's how we react to them that there seems to be a gender difference.
I totally agree with you, Doctor. One last question. One last question. What influence would emotional intelligence has on employee productivity?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. Dan Pink did some research several years ago, and he looked at motivation, why we get up out of bed in the morning and go to work. And one of the things he found was it also had nothing to do with money. A lot of the traits that he talked about was around feeling a sense of autonomy, feeling trusted. And trust is a real issue in a lot of businesses right now. Actually, it's a lot of business. Trust was an issue in businesses even before COVID, but I think COVID has amplified the lack of trust in a lot of businesses and offices. So feeling a sense of autonomy, feeling that you have a choice in the way you work is really important. Secondly is having the skills to do your job, and not just do your job, but do it really, really well. So making sure that there's some training available for you is really important. But the third one is purpose. And now we're talking about the compass, our true north. It's why we're doing the job we're doing. Does it meet our personal needs for growth and development? So yes, the two are very intimately connected.
Okay, thank you so much, Doctor. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, Dr. Peter, on behalf of everyone here for the inspiring presentation you gave us today. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. We reached to the end of the session. Stay tuned for our next live webinars during Ramadan. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.